The politicians demanding a Christian nation today would have deported Jesus. They stand at podiums holding a cross with one hand, while using the other to militarize the border against the desperate, the starving, and the hunted. They preach about Judeo-Christian values on Sunday, but by Monday, those values are buried under razor wire and steel. But history keeps the receipts. If we peel back the political noise and look at the actual foundations of the faith they claim to protect, we find a terrifying reality for modern nationalists. The savior they claim to worship was a Middle Eastern refugee. He fled state violence in the dead of night, and he only survived because a foreign, pagan country didn't ask for his papers. Today, we are uncovering the buried history of holy exiles. We are going to look at the gritty, hidden reality of the Holy Family's survival. We are going to step inside the court of an ancient African king who embarrassed modern nationalism 1400 years ago. And we are going to reveal the ultimate irony of who is actually being called illegal in America today. Before we cross the ocean to the ancient Middle East, we have to look at the ground beneath our feet. The ultimate irony of the American border crisis is the weaponization of the word immigrant. When the first European colonizers arrived on this continent, starving, lost, diseased, and fleeing religious persecution in their own homelands, they were the ultimate undocumented aliens. They were strangers in a strange land. And how were they met? They weren't met with border patrols. They weren't met with demands for papers. They were met by indigenous peoples who practiced a radical, life-saving hospitality. The original inhabitants of this land offered sanctuary. Today, the descendants of those European colonizers use their religion as a deadbolt. They lock out the descendants of the very people who saved them. They have taken the ancestral bloodlines of this very continent, indigenous and Mexican people, and labeled them illegal on the soil their forefathers walked for thousands of years. They want the aesthetic of the savior, but they actively despise the reality of the sanctuary. But to truly expose the hollow shell of modern Christian nationalism, we have to look at the text they claim to hold sacred. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, we don't find a neat, polished Sunday school story. We find a gritty, desperate escape. King Herod, paranoid and clinging to power, orders the mass execution of infants. He is the state. He has the military. And he wants the child dead. So, the central figure of Christianity is forced to become a political refugee. They flee into Egypt, a foreign pagan land historically viewed as the ancient enemy of the Israelites. But the polished stories skip over the gritty reality of what happened next. They didn't just cross the border and magically survive. They were refugees for up to 3.5 years. How did they eat? How did they live? They survived the exact same way migrants survive today. They plugged into an immigrant network. First-century Egypt had a massive Jewish immigrant population. Joseph and Mary likely headed straight for a migrant enclave. And Joseph wasn't a wealthy man. He was a tekton, a builder, a stonemason, a carpenter. For over 3 years, the earthly father of Jesus was an immigrant day laborer. He worked with his hands in a foreign economy to keep his refugee family alive, always looking over his shoulder, knowing the government back home was actively hunting toddlers. Even the famous Christmas story holds a hidden truth about their escape. Before they fled, the wise men brought them gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Historically, these weren't just symbolic religious trinkets. They were highly liquid, incredibly valuable assets. In their own story, God provides a refugee survival fund right before Herod orders the massacre. That gold paid for their desperate border crossing. Politicians today who demonize migrant laborers working construction or framing houses are demonizing the exact same socioeconomic class and the exact same struggle that kept their own savior alive. Pay close attention to the profound silence of the Egyptian text. The Egyptians didn't deport the Holy Family back to Herod's death squads. They didn't build a wall to keep the Judeans out. The son of Mary survived his childhood because foreigners let him survive. And that lived experience became the absolute bedrock of his doctrine. When that refugee grew up and began to teach, His commands weren't abstract theology. They were born from the dust of Egypt. He demanded radical love for the outsider because he watched his parents struggle as outsiders. He looked his followers in the eye and gave them the ultimate metric of their faith in Matthew 25. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me in. He didn't offer a political loophole. He explicitly tied the salvation of his followers to how they treated the undocumented, the alien, and the stranger. Because he remembered what it meant to be one. But the hypocrisy goes deeper than just their own book. Because 1,400 years ago, a real Christian king showed the world exactly what border justice looks like. The year is 615 CE. We are in Mecca, a city entirely controlled by the Quraysh, a powerful elite tribe that built an empire on trade and absolute social hierarchy. But a fracture has formed. A man named Muhammad has begun reciting a message demanding that the rich feed the poor, that the slave is equal to the master, and that the orphan is protected. The Quraysh elite didn't just disagree with the theology. Their hatred was driven by pure jealousy and envy. This new message threatened their monopoly on power. When men with absolute power feel their grip slipping, they respond with absolute violence. The early Muslims were dragged into the desert. They were starved, tortured, and laid on burning sands. They were the hunted. Seeing his people slaughtered, the Prophet Muhammad gives them a direct order to cross the sea. He points them toward the kingdom of Abyssinia. He doesn't send them to another Arab tribe. He sends them to an African Christian kingdom. He tells them, "Go to Abyssinia. There is a Christian king there under whom no one is wronged." But the Quraysh are not going to let them go. Jealousy does not stop at the border. The Meccan elite send two of their most cunning diplomats, armed with chests overflowing with gold. They cross the sea, not as refugees, but as bounty hunters. They march into the Christian court of King Najashi. They bribe the king's generals. They don't mention economics. They weaponize theology. They stand before King Najashi and say, "O king, a group of foolish youths have defected to your land. Hand them over to us." The generals, bought and paid for, urge the king to deport the refugees immediately. Take the gold, deport the aliens, and maintain an alliance with a wealthy superpower. But Najashi is a true king and a true Christian. He refuses to hand over people who sought his protection without hearing them speak. He summons the Muslims forward. A hunted refugee named Jafar ibn Abi Talib steps up. He does not beg. He speaks with calm, unbreakable intensity. "O king," Jafar says, "we were a people steeped in ignorance. The strong among us devoured the weak. We lived like this until God sent a messenger from among us. He commanded us to speak the truth, to protect the orphan, and to offer sanctuary." The Quraysh diplomats panic. They play their trump card. They try to trigger the king's religious prejudice, warning him, "Ask them what they believe about Jesus. They say terrible, blasphemous things about him." This is the ultimate trap. If Jafar lies, he compromises his faith. If he tells the truth and the king is offended, the Muslims are deported to their deaths. Najashi asks the question. Jafar simply begins to recite the Quran. He recites Surah Maryam, the chapter of Mary. He recites the verses detailing the miraculous virgin birth and how the Spirit of God appeared to Mary. Imagine this moment, a Christian king who has no preconceived notions, no media bias, and no centuries of geopolitical warfare poisoning his mind. He is a blank slate, and he is listening to a hunted Muslim refugee recite a divine revelation that honors the Mother of Christ with breathtaking reverence. Najashi begins to weep. He reaches down into the dirt of his court and picks up a small twig. He holds it up and says, "By God, the difference between what your faith says about Jesus and what my faith says about Jesus is no thicker than this twig." He turns to the Quraysh bounty hunters, rejects their bribes, and commands them to leave. He turns to the Muslims and grants them absolute, unconditional asylum. He didn't ask them to convert. He didn't ask for their papers. He didn't lock them in cages. He recognized the shared essence of God and he did what his faith demanded. He protected the vulnerable. At this point, the modern nationalist apologist will rush to defend their borders. They will say, "But crossing the border is illegal. We must obey the law of the land." But look at the history they claim to revere. Moses was a wanted fugitive who broke the laws of Pharaoh. The early Muslims were outlaws, defying the laws of the Quraysh. Jesus was hunted and condemned to death by the state as an enemy of Rome. Modern apologists love to hide behind Paul's letter to the Romans, preaching obedience to the state. But notice, they use Paul to silence the very prophets who broke the law to serve God. If your theology demands blind obedience to man-made borders, you don't worship the prophets. You worship the empire that hunted them. Then the apologists will say, "But even heaven has a wall and a gate?" Yes, it does. But they conveniently forget what their own Savior said about who gets through it. In Matthew 25, the gatekeeper doesn't ask for a passport. You are locked out of heaven because you locked the stranger out. When we look at the modern political landscape, the hypocrisy is staggering. King Najashi protected refugees of a completely different religion because his Christianity demanded justice above political convenience. Modern Christian nationalists are militarizing the border against people of their own faith. The vast majority of the Mexican and Central American migrants trekking through the desert are deeply devout Christians. If this was truly about Christian values, these families would be welcomed with open arms. It's not about faith. It's about imaginary lines drawn by conquerors. It's about protecting power. But there is a bridge hiding in plain sight, a linguistic ghost that ties this entire narrative together. When a Mexican family arrives at the border today, praying for a chance at a better life, praying for sanctuary, they might look at the wall and say a single word, Ojala. It is the Spanish word for "I hope." But that word didn't start in Spain. It was brought there by the Moors. It is a direct phonetic descendant of the Arabic phrase Inshallah, if God wills it. When modern migrants stand at the border and whisper Ojala, they are literally echoing the language of the Muslim refugees who stood before King Najashi 1,400 years ago. They are the same people, the same struggle, the same prayer. The ancient king of Abyssinia didn't build a wall, he built a bridge. He looked at the stranger, saw a reflection of the divine, and offered his hand. Modern nationalists didn't just burn that bridge. If Jesus, or the early Muslims, or King Najashi arrived at their border today, they would turn them away too.